13 years have passed since Robin Gibb's voice went silent, and yet the questions around his life have never fully gone quiet. For decades, fans only had fragments, a tabloid headline here, a whispered rumor there, a marriage that looked one way from the outside and was something else entirely behind closed doors. Robin's children grew up watching their father become a legend in real time, and in the years since his death, they have slowly, carefully, allowed the public to see the man behind the harmonies. Not to tear him down. Not to sensationalize him. But to finally explain him. Robin Hugh Gibb arrived in the world on December 22, 1949, inside the Jane Crookall maternity home on the Isle of Man, just 35 minutes ahead of his twin brother Maurice. From the very beginning, Robin existed in tandem with someone else, a closeness that would define both the best and most painful chapters of his life. His parents, Hugh and Barbara Gibb, were a musical, restless pair, and their family moved constantly in those early years, first to Manchester, then halfway across the world to Redcliffe, a small coastal town north of Brisbane, Australia. The Gibb boys earned a reputation as troublemakers long before they earned one as musicians, known around the neighborhood for mischief and small fires that worried the adults around them. But underneath that restlessness was an unusual kind of focus, one that would only reveal itself once the boys discovered what to do with all that energy. By the mid-1950s, Barry, Robin, and Maurice had started gathering together to sing, trying to mimic the close harmonies of the Everly Brothers and Paul Anka records that played in their house. Something clicked. In 1955, the brothers formed a skiffle group called the Rattlesnakes, performing at local halls with a confidence well beyond their years. After two members left the group, the brothers carried on under the name Wee Johnny Hayes and the Blue Cats. Then, in 1958, the family made the journey that would change everything, boarding a ship bound for Australia. It was there, performing on local television for the first time in 1960 on a program called Strictly for Moderns, that audiences got their first glimpse of something different in young Robin. Even at 10 years old, his voice carried a tremolo that sounded strangely mature, fragile, and powerful at the same time. Festival Records signed the brothers in the mid-1960s, and the hits started coming. In 1965, when Robin took the lead vocal on I Don't Think It's Funny, listeners noticed immediately that this was no longer a child's voice. It was the same haunting, aching instrument that the world would later mourn. But fame arrived faster than any of the Gibb brothers were prepared for, and the cost of that fame would shape the rest of Robin's life. As the Bee Gees rose through the late 1960s, Robin's personal world grew complicated in ways the public did not yet understand. In 1968, at just 18 years old, he married Molly Hullis, who worked as a secretary for the band's manager, Robert Stigwood. Their relationship had been forged under extraordinary circumstances. The two had survived the Hither Green rail crash together, a devastating train derailment that killed nearly 50 people. Surviving something like that together created a bond that, for a time, felt unbreakable. They had two children, Spencer, born in 1972, and Melissa, born in 1974. But survival is not the same as stability. By the early 1970s, Robin was spending much of his time in the United States while Molly remained in England raising their children, and the distance between them widened year by year. Robin had also developed a dependence on stimulants, amphetamines that were common among musicians trying to stay alert through endless recording sessions and tours. Those close to him later described a man whose moods swung unpredictably, periods of intense creative energy followed by exhaustion and withdrawal. By 1980, after years of living largely separate lives, Molly filed for divorce. The split turned bitter, and in 1983, Robin was jailed for 14 days after violating a court order related to the divorce proceedings, a humiliating moment for a man who, on stage, seemed untouchable. In 1985, Robin remarried. His new wife, Dwina Murphy Gibb, was an artist, writer, and self-described druid priestess whose worldview was as unconventional as his own had become. Their relationship was not a traditional one, and over time, both of them spoke openly about the fact that their marriage operated outside conventional boundaries. Dwina has spoken publicly about her own attraction to women, and the couple's arrangement, while never widely discussed during the height of Robin's fame, was acknowledged by people close to them well before his death. It was within that unconventional marriage that one of the more painful chapters of Robin's life unfolded. Around the early 2000s, Robin began a relationship with Claire Young, a younger woman who had worked in the Gibb household. The relationship continued for years, and in November 2008, Claire gave birth to Robin's daughter, Snow Evelyn Robin Julia Gibb. News of the relationship and the child did not reach the public until 2009, and when it did, it read like classic tabloid scandal: a wealthy, famous, married man, a much younger former employee, a secret daughter. Friends close to the family later said that Dwina was deeply hurt when the full truth became public, even with the openness she and Robin had built their marriage around. It was one thing to know intellectually that her husband's life included other people. It was another to watch it become a headline. Robin, for his part, never abandoned his responsibility to Snow. He purchased a home for Claire and their daughter near the family's Oxfordshire estate, and as his health began to fail in 2011 and 2012, he worked to formally provide for her, eventually arranging a settlement to ensure she would be cared for after his death. It was a quiet act of accountability in the middle of a life that had, by then, grown almost unmanageably complicated, split between two households, two sets of obligations, and a public image that bore little resemblance to the private reality. That complexity extended beyond Robin's romantic life and into the very band that made him famous. Tension between Robin and his older brother Barry simmered for decades, tracing back to disagreements over lead vocals as far back as 1967's Massachusetts. Robin briefly left the group in 1969 over creative control, frustrated by what he felt was Barry's growing dominance both behind the microphone and behind the scenes. The brothers reunited in 1970, and the world heard nothing but flawless harmony from that point forward. But those old wounds never fully closed. Friction over creative direction and recognition continued to surface throughout their decades-long career together, even as they continued making some of the most enduring music of the 20th century. Then, in 2003, came a loss that reshaped the entire family. Maurice Gibb, Robin's twin, the brother who had so often served as the emotional bridge between Robin and Barry, died unexpectedly. His death shattered whatever fragile balance had existed between the surviving brothers. In the aftermath, disagreements emerged over how to honor Maurice's legacy, including tension surrounding a planned tribute album that Barry felt exploited his brother's memory rather than honoring it. Robin found himself caught in the middle, eager to pay tribute to the twin he had spent his entire life beside, while navigating a fractured relationship with his surviving brother. That fracture never fully healed. By the early 2000s, Robin and Barry were reportedly barely speaking, the kind of quiet estrangement that often exists between people who loved each other deeply but could never quite say so. When Robin was diagnosed with cancer, Barry has said publicly that he did not learn the full extent of his brother's illness until it was already devastatingly advanced, a delay that haunted him long after Robin's death. It was not malice that kept them apart in those final years. It was the accumulated weight of decades of unspoken resentment, grief, and the strange, complicated loyalty that exists between people who built something extraordinary together and never fully figured out how to share the credit for it. By 2011, the diagnosis was undeniable: colon cancer that had already spread to his liver. Even as treatment began to take a visible toll on his body, Robin remained publicly defiant, insisting in interviews that he intended to recover. Those around him described a man clinging to hope with a kind of stubborn determination, refusing to let illness define him even as it consumed more of his strength every week. He continued working through surgeries and grueling rounds of chemotherapy, most notably collaborating with his son Robin John on the Titanic Requiem, a symphonic piece composed to mark the 100th anniversary of the Titanic's sinking. For Robin, the project carried an unmistakable personal resonance, a meditation on endurance and tragedy written by a man who understood both intimately. In April 2012, his condition worsened dramatically. He contracted pneumonia and slipped into a coma, and doctors told the family there was little left to do. Dwina and Robin John kept vigil at his bedside as the family prepared for the worst. And then, almost inexplicably, while music from the Titanic Requiem played in the room, Robin's fingers began to move. Moments later, his eyes opened. For a brief window of days, he was present again, speaking softly, recognizing his family, even talking about returning to the stage. It was a moment his son has since described as nothing short of miraculous, a final, fierce flicker of the will that had carried Robin through every other crisis in his life. It did not last. His kidneys failed, followed by his liver, and on May 20, 2012, surrounded by Dwina, Robin John, and the people who loved him most, Robin Gibb died at the age of 62. By all accounts, his final moments were peaceful. He was buried at St. Mary the Virgin Churchyard in Thame, Oxfordshire, the quiet English town that had become his home in his final years. In the time since his death, Robin's children have gradually become the keepers of his story. Robin John, his son with Dwina, has spoken in interviews about growing up alongside his father's music, about the late nights in the studio watching Robin compose simply because he didn't know how to live without creating. He has continued performing some of his father's unfinished material, ensuring that Robin's creative voice continues reaching audiences long after his passing. Spencer and Melissa, Robin's children from his first marriage, have largely kept their lives more private, though both have occasionally spoken about their father's complicated, often difficult, but ultimately devoted presence in their lives. What emerges from all of it, the marriages, the affairs, the addiction, the sibling rivalry, the grief, is not a portrait of a villain or a saint, but of a deeply human man who happened to possess one of the most distinctive voices in popular music. Robin Gibb spent his life chasing harmony, both the kind he built with his brothers on stage and the kind that always seemed to elude him everywhere else. He was, by every account from the people who knew him best, generous to a fault, restless to the point of self-destruction, and devoted to his family even when his choices made that devotion difficult to recognize from the outside. 13 years after his death, the rumors that once felt like tabloid speculation have largely been confirmed not through scandal, but through the quiet, ongoing honesty of the people who loved him. His children are not interested in protecting a myth. They are interested in honoring a man, contradictions and all. And in telling his story honestly, they have given Robin Gibb something fame never quite allowed him while he was alive, the chance to be fully, complicatedly understood. Which Robin Gibb song has stayed with you the most over the years? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the lives of legendary artists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for what's coming next.